So Jesse Brown was the first black naval aviator, and it was a unique role that he had to take on himself all alone. The armed forces were not actually integrated until 1947 by President Truman, and Jesse Brown was then 3 years later basically the first black person to actually go through naval aviation training in Pensacola and get his wings. So he was a real groundbreaker, and went through a lot of things that you might expect from that era, depending on who you were working with at any given point in time. But he was a groundbreaker and a pioneer for the Navy as a black naval aviator, and seemed to integrate quite well with the people that were in his squadron, as it turned out. So he was well regarded. He was an excellent pilot. Everybody respected him, and he and Tom Hudner, his wingman, had a real personal relationship which extended beyond Jesse's death in 1950 to a relationship with Jesse's wife and his child, who actually were present when Tom Hudner was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Korea, crash landing alongside his wingman and trying to get him out of his aircraft. Okay, Devotion is a movie that was set in the 1950s, and it was based on a book of the same name that talks about the Korean War in essence. And the two principal characters in the movie are Jesse Brown, who was the first black naval aviator, and his wingman, Tom Hudner. It takes place starting in the Mediterranean when the ship USS Lady was in the Mediterranean for a cruise. At the time, the North Koreans attacked South Korea in June of 1950. It moves from the Mediterranean to Korea, and some of the major scenes are shot in what would be December of 1950 during the episode that is known as the Chosin Reservoir. That was the time when the Allied forces had gone all the way up to the north part of Korea and were very close to the Yalu River when the Chinese Communist Army came across the Yalu River and attacked the Marines at the Chosin Reservoir. So there are both scenes for the Marines in the movie and scenes for the Navy pilots in the movie. What happens essentially is that Jesse Brown and Tom Hudner and the rest of the squadron are flying close support for the Marine Corps. Jesse Brown gets shot down probably by ground fire, crash lands in a meadow between some mountains, is obviously alive when the crash ends, and so Tom Hudner, his wingman, decides that the only way he's going to be able to get Jesse out of his aircraft is to crash land alongside of him and try to get him out of the plane that he's in. He does that. He crash lands alongside. He discovers that Jesse Brown is really pinned in by all of the metal that's around his legs, and so he can't really get him out. He calls in a helicopter, which comes in at dusk, which was problematic at the time because you couldn't fly helicopters at night in the 1950s. The helicopter crew helps Tom try to get Jesse out of the aircraft. Doesn't succeed. He's pinned in too hard, and so the helicopter has to leave, or it would also be pinned down for the night there. So when they come back, Jesse Brown has expired, and so it's a really serious ending and a tragic ending in many ways. It's an interesting movie, and it was interesting to be part of it because the way they set it up was they took an active runway in Statesboro, Georgia, one that wasn't used a lot but was still active, built the island of an aircraft carrier alongside of that runway, and actually flew real aircraft off that runway. So we had 4 Corsairs flying, and we also had the only 1950s era helicopter in existence that flies actually in the movie. And it was pretty cool from that standpoint because Corsairs are just a really interesting aircraft. So if you have a chance, look up a Corsair, and you'll see this gull-wing 1940 version of a Navy jet or a Navy aircraft. The the Corsair was an aircraft that the Navy started using probably in 1944. It was a 1943 vintage aircraft, but 1944 for the Navy, and they used it all the way through the Korean War. And it was really fun to have four of those huge Corsair engines on a runway right next to you. It was a sound that you will never forget if you hear it. So I was very privileged to be able to be part of that movie, and I'm looking forward to seeing it, I think starting November 23rd, if I'm not mistaken. So Devotion is the name of the movie. I was the technical advisor for aircraft carrier scenes in the movie.
In 1948, I graduated from high school and turned 18. At that time, you had to register for the draft. Then I went to San Francisco State College, and I was a junior in 1950, and lo and behold, the Korean War started. I joined the Navy Reserve, and I was stationed at Naval Air Station, Oakland. Well, one day a pilot comes out and says, "Anybody want to go for a ride?" Here I was, a naive 20-year-old. I'd never been in an airplane, so I got in, took a ride, I came home, and I was all excited. I told my parents, "Guess what? I went into this airplane and got a ride. I'm going to sign up for naval aviation." And lo and behold, after about 3 months, they accepted my application, and I started in at Pensacola in 1951. Well, I didn't even know where Korea was, but I felt that there must be some reason why we are supporting that particular country. And I don't know, in those days, we were teenagers, were more aware of what was happening in the world. We had just finished World War II in 1945. And so anyhow, we were growing up, and I felt if we're going to be doing that type of stuff, we're going to serve the country. And that's basically how I felt. Korea, actually, I got my wings in '52. We arrived on the task force on the line there in late January of '53. So I was there from January until the end of the war, which was in July of '53. That was 6 months at least. I served on the USS Philippine Sea, CVA 47, a sister ship of the Hornet. Flew the Grumman F-9F2 Panther jet. It was possibly the Navy's best jet in the early 1950s. Corsairs were used just like the jets on ground support. They were, it's hard to say, but on the Phil C, we had 2 jet squadrons and 2 propeller squadrons, and one of them was the F-4U, VF-94. The other propeller squadron was VA-95 Sky Raiders. Well, it was somewhat gradual because the type of fuel that we used was different than propeller-driven aircraft, and they had some problems at the very beginning landing aboard carriers. They had quite a few accidents because of the fuel problem. But I'll tell you what, flying a jet was much easier than flying a propeller-driven aircraft, because on a jet you're sitting right up at the beginning, whereas in the propeller aircraft you had this huge radial engine in front and you couldn't see the landing signal also. The thing about Jesse Brown is that they saw that when he crash landed, he was still alive. and his wingman went in and crash landed to go in to try to save him. You start wondering a little bit what went through the other pilot's mind about crash landing and trying to save your buddy when you're destroying an aircraft. But I think the devotion for the people that you flew with was more important than on the other things that, on saving an aircraft. You wanted to save your buddy.